If you go back to the summer of 1974, specifically July 24th, you find a Supreme Court that looked very different from the one we have today, but it was facing a remarkably similar question. Richard Nixon was president. He was cornered. He was under investigation, and he had convinced himself of a legal theory that he believed was bulletproof.
His belief was simple and absolute. The President of the United States exists above the judicial system. Full stop. He believed in total executive privilege. If he said a tape was private, it was private. If he labeled a document secret, that was the end of the discussion. No judge, no prosecutor, no Congress had the authority to challenge him. And Nixon felt secure in this belief for one very specific reason. He had appointed 4 of the sitting justices himself. He assumed, as politicians often do, that a judicial appointment is a transaction. I give you the job, you give me the protection. But on that hot July morning in 1974, the Supreme Court handed down a decision in United States v. Nixon.
And it wasn't close. Not 5-4, not a nail-biter. It was 8-0, unanimous, including the justices Nixon himself had placed on the bench. Their message was blunt. The president is not a king. He was ordered to turn over the tapes. And just 16 days later, Richard Nixon resigned. We teach that case as proof the system worked, as the moment the judiciary understood that protecting one man would destroy the institution itself. For the past 3 years, Donald Trump has been betting everything, his fortune, his future, and his freedom, on the belief that 1974 was an accident, a fluke. He bet that this Supreme Court, the one he built, the one with a 6-3 supermajority, would behave differently. He believed this time the transaction would hold. He gave them power. Surely they would give him immunity. He was wrong. Today, quietly, without a televised hearing, without oral arguments, without drama, the Supreme Court delivered what can only be described as the fatal blow to Donald Trump's legal strategy. And when I say fatal, I don't mean embarrassing, I don't mean politically inconvenient, I mean the one strategy keeping him out of a prison cell has now collapsed. Tonight, we're breaking down the order that just dropped from the High Court. It's short, it's unsigned, and it's devastating. The Supreme Court refused to intervene. They denied the stay. They rejected the delay. And in doing so, they sent a crystal-clear message to the lower courts, to Special Counsel Jack Smith, and to the American people. Proceed. The delay is over. The absolute immunity fantasy is over. To understand why this is the end of the road, you have to look at what Trump was actually asking for. His lawyers never argued innocence. Notice that. They didn't dispute the facts. They didn't say he didn't take the classified documents. They didn't say he didn't try to overturn the election.
Instead, they argued procedure. Timing. Their claim was that a former president cannot be tried for actions taken in office, or at the very least that the question is so complex, so unprecedented, so heavy that everything should pause for 6 months, maybe a year, while the Supreme Court thinks it over. That wasn't a legal strategy, it was a calendar strategy. The goal was brutally simple: push the trial past November 5, 2024. If he wins, he orders the Justice Department to drop the case. If he loses, he deals with it later. But under no circumstances could he face a jury before the voters went to the polls. That was Plan A, and Plan B, and Plan C. Today, the Supreme Court lit that calendar on fire. By refusing the interlocutory appeal and denying the stay, they snapped the rubber band back into place. Jurisdiction returns to the trial judge. Witnesses get subpoenaed. Jury selection begins. And here's the part that should be causing absolute panic at Mar-a-Lago tonight. There were no dissents, no furious objection from Justice Clarence Thomas, no emotional defense of executive power from Justice Alito, and no lifeline, none from Trump's own appointees, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Barrett. The silence from the conservative wing of the court is the loudest sound in Washington right now. It tells us Trump's arguments have gone so far, so detached from constitutional history, that even the judges he appointed looked at them and said, "No, we can't go there." They reached the same conclusion the Nixon court reached 50 years ago, because if you declare a president absolutely immune from criminal prosecution, you're not just saving Donald Trump, you're erasing the Supreme Court. If the president is above the law, the court has no power over the president, and by making that ruling, the justices would be voting themselves into irrelevance. Faced with a choice between saving Donald Trump and saving their own authority, they chose themselves. This is a disaster for Trump's defense team. I've spoken with former federal prosecutors today, people who've tried espionage cases, people who've tried RICO cases, and they all say the same thing. He has no defense on the merits. Without immunity, what's left? Is he going to say he didn't hide the documents? There's security footage. Is he going to deny pressuring the Georgia Secretary of State? There's audio. Is he going to deny inciting the mob? We watched it live. The only defense was, you are not allowed to prosecute me. That defense is now dead. And look at the timing. All of this is happening just as the primary season is coming to an end.
Donald Trump wanted to pivot to the general election. He wanted the next 6 months to be simple. Rallies, crowds, airplanes, talking points about the border, talking points about the economy. He wanted to be on stages, not benches. Instead, because of this ruling, he is going to spend the next 6 months sitting at a defendant's table in a freezing cold courtroom in Washington, D.C., day after day, listening as his own former chief of staff, his former vice president, and his former White House counsel take the stand and testify against him. He is going to be physically tethered to that courtroom. And the split screen, Trump the candidate versus Trump the criminal defendant, is not something his campaign can spin or control. But there's a deeper layer here, and it's psychological. For his entire life, Donald Trump has operated on one core belief: everything is transactional, and everyone has a price. Loyalty to him is personal, impurchasable. He believed that by rushing Amy Coney Barrett onto the Supreme Court days before the 2020 election, he was buying insurance. He believed that by standing by Brett Kavanaugh through that brutal confirmation hearing, he was buying a vote. Today proves he fundamentally misunderstood the institution he thought he had captured. These justices are conservatives. Yes, they are overturning abortion rights. They are weakening environmental regulations. They are delivering victories the conservative legal movement has wanted for decades. But they are not Trump employees. They have lifetime tenure. They never have to run for office again. They never have to ask him for a favor again. And today, they cut the cord. This is a betrayal Trump likely cannot psychologically process. You can already see it in the frantic posts on Truth Social, the screaming in all caps, the accusations of election interference, the rage directed at corrupt courts. But notice something important. Notice who he isn't naming yet. He's attacking the system, but he's struggling to attack the specific justices because they are his legacy. If he calls them corrupt, he's admitting he appointed corrupt people. He's trapped in a logic loop entirely of his own creation. So what happens next? What is the real-world fallout of this fatal blow? First, the timeline accelerates.
Judge Tanya Chutkan in Washington, D.C. has been crystal clear. She intends to move fast. She has repeatedly said the public has a right to a speedy trial. Now that the Supreme Court has removed the stop sign, she's going to put her foot on the gas. We could be looking at jury selection by late summer. We could be looking at a verdict before Election Day. Second, the pressure on witnesses explodes. Think about the people in Trump's orbit, the aides, the co-conspirators, the people who have been holding the line, betting everything on delay, betting that Trump would run out the clock, win the election, and make all of this disappear with a pardon. Today, the Supreme Court told those people something devastating. He can't save you. If Trump has no immunity, you have no immunity. And once that reality sinks in, the incentives change overnight. The incentive to flip, the incentive to cooperate, the incentive to cut a deal with Jack Smith just skyrocketed. When a ship is clearly going down, the rush for the lifeboats gets violent. Third, this ruling reshapes the election itself. We have never in the history of this republic had a major party presidential nominee simultaneously sitting for a criminal trial of this magnitude. We don't know exactly what that looks like. We don't know how swing voters react to hearing sworn testimony day after day. But we do know this: Trump's greatest strength, his ability to dominate the news cycle, is about to be weaponized against him. He won't be dominating headlines with rallies, he'll be dominating them with court transcripts. Now pause and consider the counterfactual. Imagine the road not taken. If the Supreme Court had granted the stay, if they had agreed to hear the case next term, they would have effectively given Trump amnesty by delay. They would have ensured voters went to the polls without knowing whether their potential president was a convicted felon. By denying him today, the court did the bare minimum. But in this moment, the bare minimum feels heroic. They simply allowed the normal order of law to proceed. They treated Donald Trump like an ordinary citizen, and that may be the one thing he cannot survive. His entire persona, his entire business model is built on exceptionalism. Rules are for little people, taxes are for little people, jail is for little people. Today, the Supreme Court said, actually no, the rules apply to you too. This decision also sends a message outward to the courts in Georgia, to the court in Florida. Judge Aileen Cannon in Florida has been dragging her feet, issuing baffling rulings that seem to favor Trump. This signal from the Supreme Court is a warning shot to her as well. It says, don't get too creative. We're not going to protect you if you go rogue. It stiffens the spine of the entire federal judiciary. We are now entering the most volatile phase of this saga. Donald Trump does not handle loss well, he does not handle rejection well, and he absolutely does not handle the realization that he has lost control. For 3 years, he controlled the pace, motion after motion, delay after delay. He dictated the terms. Today, he lost the con. Jack Smith is now driving the bus, and Jack Smith does not break for politics. There's an old saying about the law: the wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Trump has been betting everything on the slowly part. He forgot about the fine part. Because once the process reaches its end, the facts matter, the evidence matters, and without the artificial shield of immunity, Donald Trump is naked before the law. Years from now, 10 years, 50 years, historians will likely point to this unsigned Supreme Court order as the pivot point, the moment the fever broke, the moment institutions looked at the threat and decided to hold the line. It wasn't dramatic, no speeches, no fireworks, just a denial. But that denial reshaped the entire trajectory of 2024. It means there will be a trial, it means there will be a verdict, and it means the American people will make their decision based on truth, not delay. The strategy of delay is over. The strategy of immunity is over. Now the trial of the century begins, and for the man who believed he owned the court, the reality of what he's facing is finally setting in.